Imagine renting a room so tiny your dreams have to sleep in shifts. Welcome to the Victorian boarding house, where privacy costs extra and someone else's cough comes free. Here, the wallpaper peels like it's trying to escape. The ceiling drips philosophy, and the landlady knows more about you than your own mother. We'll meet women who lived by candlelight, men who polished poverty till it shone, and matrons who ruled like empresses of dust. Before you cross the threshold, do one kind thing. Subscribe. Not for me, but for every poor Victorian who spent a fortune just to freeze politely. Now tell me, what time is it where you are? Because here, in this crooked slice of 1890, it's always rent o'clock. You arrive on a soot-streaked London street. Your gloves are damp, your patience thinner. The door groans open, and the smell of boiled cabbage and quiet despair greets you like an old friend. The landlady's footsteps fade, and you're left alone in your new kingdom. If the term kingdom can be stretched to include slanted floors, a bed that sighs when you sit, and a single window fogged with the ghost of other people's breath. The first thing you notice is the tilt. It's not dramatic enough to call structural damage, but it's persuasive. The entire room leans gently toward the alley, as if London itself is trying to shake you loose. You step carefully, half expecting to slide. The floorboards complain like they've been holding a grudge since the Crimean War. There's an iron bed pushed tight against the wall, its frame painted black, though the paint is peeling like bad sunburn. The mattress gives a half-hearted puff of dust when you press it, and somewhere inside it, something squeaks. You decide not to investigate. The wallpaper is a tragedy in slow motion. Once it might have been a cheerful floral. Now it's a graveyard of colors. Yellow faded to gray faded to memory. It curls at the corners, as though trying to escape up the wall. When you run a finger along it, it makes a faint sighing sound. The plaster beneath feels soft, almost alive. A Victorian house doesn't crumble, it exhales. The air carries a layered perfume, starch, smoke, damp wool, and that faint medicinal tang of carbolic soap, the official scent of denial. It's cold, but not dramatically so. The kind of chill that makes you aware of every bone that pays rent in your body. You find the tiny fireplace, an ornamental joke more than a source of heat, and discover half a lump of coal inside, perhaps left by an optimistic predecessor. It winks at you like, "Go on, try." Over your head, a patch of plaster has blistered, the color of weak tea. From it hangs a water stain in the shape of a map, maybe Europe, maybe Mold's idea of art. In the corner, an enamel basin rests on a crooked wooden stand. It has two taps, one for cold and the other optimistically labeled hot, though both emit only the slow creak of pipework reconsidering its career. Still, it's yours. Your first thought isn't disgust. It's relief. You've been walking London all day, and the city has greeted you with fog thick as broth and rent prices sharp enough to cut pride. Rooms like this are the only spaces the working poor could afford, carved out of old Georgian townhouses that once held families, then tenants, then secrets. By the 1880s, overcrowding was epidemic. Landlords split houses into halves, then halves again, until one building might contain 30 souls, and no privacy at all. The Board of Health called it subdivision. Tenants called it home. You drop your bag, a single suitcase, its handle wrapped in twine, and it lands with a sound that feels final. This is where your London story begins. You sit on the edge of the bed. It groans, offended. A small cloud of dust rises, dances in the air, and settles like the ghosts of past renters watching you take their spot. You whisper a small apology. You take stock. There's a nightstand with a drawer that doesn't close, a cracked mirror tilted just enough to distort your reflection, and a single chair missing one leg's worth of confidence. You could hang a painting, but it would slide to the floor out of protest. You try the window. It opens a fraction before sticking in place, framing a view of the alley below. A narrow canyon of brick, laundry lines, and gaslight haze. Somewhere out there, someone is coughing, and someone else is singing to drown them out. From another window, a woman empties a basin of gray water that hits the cobbles with a slap. London breathes through its drains. You lean closer. Across the alley, another boarding house mirrors yours. Identical windows, identical curtains, identical ghosts. You lock eyes with a stranger on the other side. A man, pale as moonlight, adjusting his collar. For a brief second, you nod at each other, two actors sharing a stage direction. Then he disappears from sight. The city folds back into itself. There's a piece of advice passed between tenants, written nowhere but remembered by all. Never unpack too quickly. You place your case on the chair, still tied with twine, as if you might need to flee at any moment. Most do. Some just forget to actually leave. In moments like this, London feels less like a city and more like a massive, half-sentient organism. Arteries of soot, lungs of fog, heart of brick and sweat. The poor feed it, the rich rent it, the rest endure it. You lie back for the first time. The mattress is uneven. The pillow faintly smells of lavender gone to vinegar. Above you, the cracked ceiling resembles an old map of the world, one where all the colonies have been erased. You listen. Downstairs, someone's whistling through bad teeth. In the next room, the sound of a child crying is quickly hushed. Pipes rattle like distant thunder, and somewhere, faintly, you hear laughter. Not cruel, not kind, just the tired laughter of people still alive enough to find it funny. You close your eyes and try to imagine warmth, the kind that doesn't come from coal but from the thought that tomorrow might be easier. Rent here ranges from 6 to 8 shillings a week, depending on how many corners your room has and whether or not the landlady likes your handwriting. She doesn't do deposits. If you leave early, she keeps the sheets. If you stay too long, she keeps the sheets anyway. You think of the other houses you passed today. Signs reading, "Rooms to let," each letter painted in desperation. Some were better, some worse, but all carried that same faint promise. Privacy for sale, humanity included for an additional fee. It occurs to you, as the candle dips low, that everything in this room is tilted. The bed, the chair, even the light. You feel it in your balance, a kind of quiet vertigo that seeps into thought. It's not the floor leaning. It's you. You're adapting already. You laugh under your breath, softly enough that the room won't hear. It's temporary, you tell yourself. Just until I find something better. That's what everyone says. That's how they stay forever. You learn quickly that the boarding house isn't governed by laws. It's governed by etiquette. And etiquette here is far more dangerous. There's no printed rule book, no polite pamphlet nailed to the wall. The system survives on memory, gossip, and passive-aggressive sighs. You discover the rules the same way Victorians discovered cholera, by suffering the symptoms first. The first rule comes with breakfast. It's 7:30, and you descend into the communal dining room, armed with mild optimism and a spoon. The air already tastes of burnt toast and compromise. You find a place at the table, an achievement as every chair carries invisible claims of ownership established through centuries, or at least since last Tuesday. You sit in one belonging to Mrs. Featherby and know it instantly by the silence that follows. No one looks at you, but you feel them calculating your worth. Mrs. Featherby herself, a widow of no particular age but enormous presence, glances up from her porridge. She doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. Her eyebrows perform the eviction. You move 2 chairs down, where the air feels slightly less condemned. Lesson 1. In a boarding house, territory is psychological, not physical. Rule 2 arrives with tea. You pour from the shared pot, and then learn that the second pour belongs to whoever supplied the sugar. Sugar is a matter of diplomacy here, rationed like affection. You glance around for guidance, but it's too late. The woman beside you sniffs sharply. That was Mrs. Haxby's pot. A scandal, apparently. You apologize, but she smiles faintly. The smile of someone adding your name to an invisible blacklist. And so, without meaning to, you begin memorizing the codes. No whistling near tea. No singing after 8. Never speak ill of the landlady unless she's in earshot. Then praise her first. The piano in the parlor is for guests only, though no guest has dared touch it since the summer of '87. Borrowing a candle is acceptable. Borrowing soap is an act of war. Every object in the house has moral value. To take the wrong chair or use the wrong cup is to trespass against the community. Respectability is the religion here, and the rituals are absurdly specific. You overhear 2 tenants debating whether a gentleman may butter both sides of a bun. It's not a question of taste. It's a question of class. The wrong answer could end friendships. You meet the poet, or rather, the man who insists he's a poet. His rent is 2 weeks overdue, but he's immune to embarrassment. One night, he commits a social sin of the highest order. He overboils the communal porridge. It bubbles over like lava, coating the stove and perfuming the house with the scent of burnt oats. The next morning, he's exiled, not by decree, but by silence. Every face turns away when he enters the room. He leaves within the week, muttering about artistic persecution. His bowl remains on the shelf for months, a relic of moral decay. Then there's Miss Ellen Pierce, cheerful seamstress, always humming. Harmless, you'd think. But she breaks the cardinal rule: joy without permission. She hums during supper, some lilting tune from the music hall, and is promptly shushed by 3 separate parties, none of whom were enjoying their soup anyway. Music, declares Mrs. Featherby, belongs to the Sabbath. The following evening, Ellen hums again, quieter this time, and earns the disapproval of the house. She stops smiling within a week. The silence after her absence hums louder than she ever did. That's the power of the invisible code. It turns survival into choreography. Every gesture must be deliberate, every breath modest. Poverty is forgivable, impropriety is not. You begin to understand why Victorians invented so many manners. When 10 people share 1 kitchen, 2 toilets, and a moral panic, civility is the only illusion of control left. These rules don't prevent chaos, they organize it. Take the matter of washing. There's 1 shared washstand on each floor, and the etiquette surrounding it is more complex than parliamentary procedure. Morning use is by rank. Clerks first, then widows, then miscellaneous. Each basin of water can be reused twice, provided the next person pretends not to notice. You wash quickly, politely, never fully clean. Cleanliness is less about hygiene and more about appearing like someone who still deserves to be seen. Even illness has decorum. The coughs from next door grow worse, but you pretend not to hear. It would be rude to acknowledge another's suffering unless invited. When the coughing stops altogether, you wait a day before asking, just in case they've merely ascended to a quieter floor. And yet, absurd as it seems, the system works. These fussy courtesies keep the fragile ecosystem alive. Without them, the house would descend into open warfare. The rules give structure to helplessness, the way a teacup gives shape to water. Still, the irony isn't lost on you. The stricter the manners, the closer the poverty. In the grand houses of Mayfair, people dine with abandon. Here, a crumb dropped on the floor is a public scandal. The smaller the world, the louder its rules. Sometimes the etiquette turns almost theatrical. On Sundays, everyone dresses in their finest, even those who can't afford church, and parade through the hallways as though each were hosting the Queen. Hats at angles, gloves carefully darned, faces powdered into submission. The illusion is maintained for exactly 1 hour, until someone burns the stew again and the sanctity dissolves into smoke. You find yourself obeying, even when no one's watching. You fold your napkin just so, knock before entering rooms that aren't locked, and lower your voice instinctively whenever gossip starts to bloom. The rules slip beneath the skin. They become part of the architecture. And yet, every so often, rebellion flickers. The butcher's daughter downstairs laughs too loudly. The tailor upstairs keeps late hours and forgets to apologize. Someone sneaks a newspaper into the loo. A crime of leisure. Each small defiance feels heroic, even if it's punished by a disapproving cough from the corridor. You start to wonder, is this etiquette keeping people decent or just keeping them tired? It's hard to tell where civility ends and fear begins. The Victorians believed manners separated them from the lower beasts. But you suspect the beasts got more sleep. One night you overhear a whispered confession from Mrs. Featherby herself. She's telling the landlady that she misses her old house. 3 rooms, sunlight, a garden she never had time to tend. We were poorer, she says, but freer. The landlady murmurs something sympathetic, and the two share a long silence. The next morning, Mrs. Featherby scolds a young tenant for whistling near the tea. That's how grief survives here, disguised as discipline. As the days pass, you stop seeing the rules as cruelty. They're a strange form of comfort. When the world outside the window is unpredictable, rent, work, the weather, it helps to know that inside, at least, there are constants. Tea at 7, silence after 8, soap always off limits. Still, it wears on you. You catch yourself flinching when someone laughs too loud, apologizing when you breathe too freely. The boarding house doesn't need locks. It builds obedience through shared embarrassment. It's not that you're afraid of breaking the rules. You're afraid of being noticed. And yet, there's tenderness in the absurdity. Late one evening, you find the house unusually quiet. Someone, perhaps Ellen Pierce before she left, has pinned a small note on the dining room wall. It reads, in delicate handwriting, "Please remember, we are all temporary." You smile, alone in the dim gaslight, because that, at last, feels like the truest rule of all. You can survive poverty. What breaks you is the etiquette. You find the parlor by accident. Every boarding house has one, though to call it a room feels generous. It's more of an exhibit, a fragile display of gentility meant to convince visitors that everything within these 4 crumbling walls is perfectly respectable. The landlady calls it the front room, as though it were the face of the house. powdered, polite, and slightly dishonest. The first time you enter, you hesitate on the threshold. The air itself feels rehearsed. A fire smolders in the grate, though it gives off more sentiment than heat. A few chairs are arranged with ceremonial precision, their legs bowed with exhaustion. The wallpaper is a weary green damask, faded at the edges, as if trying to remember its original purpose. The room smells faintly of dust, lavender, and boiled cabbage, a combination that somehow communicates aspiration. The clock on the mantel ticks with the kind of determination only found in old clocks and desperate people. Its face is cracked, but it still insists on dignity. This is the Victorian parlor, the heart of the performance. Here, guests are received as if one owned the building. The irony is obvious to everyone, but that's the point. Pretense is the tax of respectability. You don't own the room. You borrow it, briefly, like a costume. Mrs. Tim, the landlady, insists the parlor remain fit for callers, though few callers ever come. Once a week, she dusts the piano that hasn't been tuned since the Crimean War and straightens the crocheted antimacassars on the chairs. Decorative headrest covers that exist solely to prove civilization hasn't entirely collapsed. The teacups on the sideboard are for show. One is chipped, another glued. Together they look like survivors of polite conversation. You watch as a tenant, Miss Ellen Pierce, returned briefly to collect a forgotten parcel, is ushered into the parlor to receive a gentleman visitor. The ritual is precise. She sits upright on the edge of the chair, hands folded in her lap, smile carefully neutral. The gentleman, a clerk by his ink-stained cuffs, stands rather than sits, holding his hat like an apology. They discuss the weather, the price of candles, the moral decline of youth. Every word is measured, as though being graded by invisible judges. You realize this isn't conversation, it's survival theater. In the Victorian world, reputation was currency, and women had to spend theirs with excruciating care. A female tenant receiving a man in her bedroom would be ruinous. The parlor offered the illusion of propriety, a chaperoned battlefield. The door stays ajar, the clock ticks loudly, and the house listens with both ears. After the clerk leaves, Ellen exhales for the first time. Her cheeks pinken. She smooths her skirt, not from vanity but from exhaustion. The performance is over. She survived another act without scandal. Later, you witness a different scene. A Sunday afternoon, the tenants gathered for tea. It's less a social event than a collective audition for middle-class salvation. Mrs. Featherby, resplendent in black bombazine, presides like a duchess. She pours tea into thin cups, her hands trembling slightly from the weight of ceremony. Mr. Haxby, a retired shopkeeper with the voice of a foghorn, monopolizes the conversation with tales of his business successes, all of which appear to have ended in bankruptcy. Each guest plays a part. The poet, freshly reinstated after his porridge scandal, adopts a tone of tragic refinement, quoting Tennyson at intervals. Miss Lockwell, the milliner, sighs dramatically about the difficulty of finding true silk these days. Mrs. Tim smiles beatifically, as though pleased to see her tenants performing decency for one another. You sip weak tea and watch, unsure whether you're part of the play or its audience. Every detail in this room conspires toward illusion. The curtains are drawn to hide the grimy street outside. The lace tablecloth is fraying, but turned so the worst edge faces the wall. Even the fire crackles as if on cue. The Victorians understood something modernity often forgets: appearance, is morality. To look orderly is to be forgiven everything else. The landlady glides by, refilling cups. Her smile has the serene tyranny of a queen who knows the limits of her empire. We must always receive callers properly, she tells you with the gentle menace of someone quoting scripture. One never knows who might recommend the house. You nod obediently. Recommendation in this world is the difference between solvency and ruin. Many boarding houses live or die on gossip. A good word in a church pew, a discreet nod from a shopkeeper, a rumor that the sheets are clean. The parlor is the evidence, the respectable mask presented to outsiders. Outside the parlor, reality continues. Dripping taps, quarrels over soap, unpaid rent. But within it, time holds still. The room pretends to belong to another century, one of order, manners, and piano recitals. The illusion is fragile, but everyone agrees to believe it. One evening, you wander in when it's empty. The gaslight hums faintly, and the room seems almost embarrassed to be seen without its actors. The chairs sit like resting soldiers after battle. The wallpaper's pattern, a tangle of vines and roses, seems to move in the flicker of the flame, curling closer together, as if gossiping in secret. You imagine all the conversations this room has overheard, confessions whispered over tea, proposals that went nowhere, polite rejections delivered with sugar. You run a finger over the piano keys. They respond with a weary chord, slightly out of tune, the sound of history clearing its throat. Once, this piano was the centerpiece of the home. Now it's a relic, maintained not for music, but for the idea that music once existed. You picture the original owners, middle class, optimistic, long gone. They left behind their furniture, their wallpaper, perhaps their ghosts. When the house was divided into lodgings, the parlor remained intact, a fossil of aspiration. It's strange. The poorer the house becomes, the more fiercely it clings to symbols of gentility. There's a kind of bravery in that. Pretending to be better off isn't just vanity, it's survival. For the Victorian working poor, reputation was armor against pity. To appear respectable meant you still belonged to the world of the living. You could endure hunger, cold, and endless rent so long as no one pitied you. The next afternoon, a new lodger arrives. A traveling salesman, loud, brash, trailing the scent of cheap cologne and better days. Within hours, he's in the parlor, regaling anyone who'll listen with tales of his connections. You notice how the women sit up straighter, how the men subtly adjust their collars. For a few minutes, hope flares, absurd, impossible hope, that perhaps this man knows someone important, that this dingy house still touches the edge of society. Then he spills tea on the rug and swears under his breath. The spell breaks. Mrs. Featherby gasps. The parlor exhales disappointment. The show ends early. After he leaves, you linger. The teacups are empty now, the silence slightly frayed. You look around the room, at the fraying lace, the honest firelight, the faces pretending not to notice the cracks. You understand something the Victorians never admitted. The parlor isn't a lie. It's a prayer. It's a small act of collective hope, that manners might outlast misery, that politeness might disguise despair, that one day someone important might step through that door and see you not as a lodger, but as a person worth knowing. The clock ticks on, stubbornly optimistic. The wallpaper listens. Everyone's acting, and the wallpaper's the only honest audience. No one believes the performance, but everyone applauds. Because hope needs applause. So before you go, If you've made it this far without spilling your tea or losing faith in humanity, the least you can do is subscribe. Think of it as leaving a polite calling card before you step out of the parlor. It's what any respectable lodger would do. Upstairs, the house changes. The air feels thinner, as though the walls themselves are holding their breath. These upper rooms, smaller, quieter, cheaper, belong mostly to women. Seamstresses, governesses, typists, companions. They arrive with small trunks, large hopes, and the delicate determination of people who can't afford to fail. You climb the creaking staircase and catch the faint scent of starch and ink, laundry and letters, the twin industries of survival. Behind each narrow door, a life unfolds in careful silence. A needle dips and rises. A typewriter clatters like rain. A hymn hums faintly under the sound of dripping pipes. It's the orchestra of independence, played pianissimo so as not to draw attention. The landlady calls them her ladies, though the title is less compliment than classification. In a world that mistrusts women without husbands, ladies sound safer than lodgers. These women are expected to embody morality simply to justify existing alone. They live under the polite surveillance of a society that fears what it cannot categorize. Take Miss Agnes Lorimer, for example, a governess between positions. She spends her days mending gloves and rehearsing answers to imaginary interview questions. Each morning, she scrubs her single cup and saucer as though washing away judgment. Once a week, she writes letters to family in the country, though everyone suspects no such family exists. Still, the pretense of belonging buys her another week of peace. Across the hall lives Miss Hester Vale, typist for a solicitor. She earns 15 shillings a week, half of which goes to rent. Her room is so small that she must open the window to change her mind. But she keeps her collar starched, her handwriting neat, and her temper invisible. After dark, she practices shorthand by candlelight, transcribing sermons to improve her speed. God as shorthand for survival. Then there's Mrs. Penny, a widow of limited means. She corrects anyone who forgets the Mrs. part. Her husband died years ago, but she wears his memory like armor. She polices the hallway with moral precision, scolding the typist for humming and the seamstress for opening her window too freely. It's not cruelty, it's strategy. In a boarding house, respectability must be performed loudly enough for witnesses. The Victorians had a name for these women, the surplus. By the late 19th century, Britain's census revealed something alarming to polite society. There were more single women than marriageable men, thousands of educated, employable women with no legal or financial anchor. Newspapers called it the problem of the independent woman, as though self-sufficiency were a contagious disease. Publications like The Girl's Own Paper offered guidance, how to live modestly, work diligently, and remain above suspicion. One 1898 article gently warned that independence must never appear masculine, advising women to soften their confidence with humility and quiet grace. The same magazine published room decor tips for lady lodgers, recommending floral curtains, an embroidered cushion, and a feminine atmosphere of moral calm. None of which came cheap. You see these codes play out daily. Each woman in the house crafts her own illusion of gentility. The seamstress leaves her candle burning past midnight so passers-by assume she's industrious, not lonely. The typist places a prayer book by the window, though she hasn't been to church in months. Mrs. Penny hangs a picture of a naval officer she's never met. "My late brother," she says firmly to anyone who looks too long. The irony is sharp. Independence must be displayed, but never flaunted. A woman living alone is brave until she looks too comfortable. Then she's suspect. Landladies often refuse unmarried tenants outright, unless vouched for by a clergyman. Some houses require female lodgers to keep the door ajar when receiving visitors. Others forbid male callers entirely, except in cases of business and in the presence of another lady. That's the phrase that defines the age. In the presence of another lady. Morality here depends on witnesses. Downstairs, the men boast of hardship. Upstairs, the women endure it quietly. Their resilience hides behind domestic ritual, lace mending, careful hairpins, soft laughter. They've mastered the art of appearing delicate while being unbreakable. One evening, as fog curls against the windows, you hear soft voices through the thin wall. Miss Lorimer and Miss Vale are talking. Rare, since conversation among women here tends to risk intimacy, and intimacy risks gossip. "She said I was too independent," Miss Vale murmurs. Imagine, as if independence were something you could measure in ounces. Miss Lorimer laughs, a tired, elegant laugh. "It's all right. They only call you independent until they need your help." The two share a silence so deep it feels like solidarity. Below them, Mrs. Tim the landlady checks her ledger by lamplight. She keeps a separate column for ladies' floor, conduct. It's mostly blank, except for the occasional notation. Late caller, respectable, or laundry on windowsill, common. Each mark, a reminder that even privacy here must pay rent. You think of how these women navigate their narrow worlds, the calculated politeness, the endless self-auditing. They move like dancers in corsets, constrained, graceful, aware of every breath. Society tells them independence is admirable, but only if it looks like dependence in disguise. And yet, for all the constraint, there's quiet revolution here. Every needle threaded after midnight, every typewritten page, every breath of solitude is a declaration. They are rewriting the rules in real time, 1 week's rent at a time. When Hester receives a letter one morning, typed envelope, masculine handwriting, the house hums with speculation. A suitor, a scandal. She opens it privately, then slips it into her bodice without comment. The letter remains a mystery, but her back straightens slightly afterward. The other women pretend not to notice, but there's a flicker of shared victory in the air. The Victorians wrote endlessly about the dangers of female independence. But what they feared wasn't immorality. It was endurance. The sight of women surviving without permission. Sometimes on Sunday afternoons, they gather in the parlor to sew together. The conversation stays shallow. Fabric, weather, the rising price of coal. But the silence between words hums with understanding. You watch them bend over their work, needles flashing in the light. It looks almost like prayer. Later, as night presses close, you return to your own room. The walls are thin enough to hear breathing from the floor above. Someone is crying quietly. Someone else hums a lullaby. You realize the whole house depends on these women. Their restraint, their labor, their invisible strength. Without them, it would collapse into chaos. Down the hall, the typist's candle still burns. She's copying out legal documents by hand, her fingers ink-stained, her eyes heavy. She pauses for a moment, stares at the flame, and smiles faintly. Not because anything's funny, but because surviving another day sometimes feels like a small joke shared with the universe. You blow out your own candle and lie awake, thinking of all the knocks these women endure, from neighbors, from society, from fate itself. Every knock on the door sounds the same. Every knock on the door sounds like a question about virtue. Downstairs, the air feels heavier. The scent of ink and pipe smoke mingles with the faint metallic tang of pride. This is the men's floor, a different kingdom entirely. If the rooms above whisper of respectability, the ones down here perform it. Each door conceals a man trying to remember what success used to feel like. Clerks, retired soldiers, tutors, failed inventors, all exiles from the middle class, keeping up appearances one cufflink at a time. You pass the shared washstand, and there it is, the universal morning ritual. One man stands before the mirror, polishing his single pair of shoes until they reflect his face back at him. Not accurately, but flatteringly. His name is Mr. Dalton, and he polishes as if salvation depends on the shine. Perhaps it does. Every night he repeats the ceremony. "So my dignity stays polished," he says, half a joke, half confession. The shoes are immaculate, the soles less so. He's worn through the leather, but he refuses to have them mended. New soles would mean admitting he's walked too far from who he used to be. Around him, the other men observe their own small liturgies. The ex-soldier folds his uniform jacket over a chair each night, though he hasn't worn it in years. The clerk irons his collars with the precision of a man who's lost control of everything else. The drawing tutor spends an hour arranging his pencils by length, though no students have come for weeks. In a world where poverty is loud, these rituals are quiet acts of rebellion. Victorian London was full of such men. Ghosts of gentility wandering through a city that had outgrown them. They rented rooms in boarding houses, not just for shelter, but for camouflage. A respectable address on the right street could disguise the slow unraveling of a career. Letters of recommendation were displayed like medals, even when the ink had faded and the references were dead. There's a particular cruelty to downward mobility in the 19th century. To be poor was one thing. To be poor after comfort was another entirely. For women, the fall was softened by sympathy. For men, it was scandal. A failed gentleman was worse than a villain. Society had no category for him, so it invented mockery instead. You meet Mr. Haycroft, once a clerk in a counting house, now a ledger ghost. His rent is always punctual, his beau immaculate. But you notice he never eats breakfast with the others. One morning, curiosity gets the better of you, and you peek into the kitchen. He's there alone, stirring tea made from yesterday's leaves. No bread, no butter, just the performance of normality. When footsteps approach, he hums softly, as though mid-meal. That's the secret skill of the fallen man. Starvation disguised as routine. Then there's Sergeant Weathers, late of Her Majesty's Army, who greets everyone as Sir out of habit. His stories are mostly cheerful, except the ones he doesn't finish. He spends his pension on tobacco and respect. Once, after too much gin, he confides that he misses being ordered around. "At least you knew who to blame," he says, laughing into his sleeve. These men don't compete for wealth anymore. They compete for composure. The greatest sin here isn't debt. It's despair. You can owe money, but never let it show. Each morning, the hall fills with the symphony of small pretensions. Brushes sweeping jackets, boots squeaking faintly, the rattle of a borrowed razor. They leave the house at the same time every day, no matter what. Off to the office, though many no longer have one. They walk the city until dusk, then return with the posture of men returning from work. The act must never drop. Victorian moralists called this the performance of respectability, and it was considered as vital as breathing. A clean shirt could mean the difference between an invitation and an eviction. Manners were currency, silence a savings account. You notice it in the way they address one another, courteous, formal, slightly distant. Too much friendliness risks familiarity, and familiarity reveals weakness. Better to nod, to speak in sentences polished by habit. Fine morning. Work steady, thank God. Hope your cold is improved. Lies as liturgy, and yet beneath all this stiffness, there's tenderness, unspoken, fragile, and oddly heroic. One night, the ex-soldier finds the clerk coughing blood in the stairwell. No questions, no alarm. He simply hands over a flask, pats his shoulder, and says, "Cold night, eh?" That's compassion in this house. Practical, wordless, disguised as small talk. Every now and then, a success story flickers through. A lodger gets a promotion, moves to better quarters, leaves behind an echo of triumph. His name lingers on lips for weeks, a ghost of possibility. Then life resumes its equilibrium. Quiet endurance, dusted with dignity. On Sundays, they gather in the parlor, pretending to read newspapers. Half of them are outdated. One still reports the Crimean War. The ritual isn't about news, it's about posture. A man holding a paper looks employed. A man looking idle invites pity. And pity here is the final indignity. The conversations are harmless fictions. My employer's expanding the firm. I've investments out east. Just waiting for a letter from my brother. The same letter that never comes, week after week. Everyone knows. Everyone agrees to the lie. It's how politeness survives poverty. Occasionally, the landlady hosts a gentleman's tea. The table is laid with cheap china, the sugar rationed like treasure. The men sit in solemn good humor, discussing politics and rail timetables. One raises the topic of the empire, and for 10 whole minutes, they are men of consequence again, debating destiny over lukewarm tea. Then someone mentions rent, and the illusion collapses quietly. You realize that fragility, when performed long enough, begins to look like grace. There's a peculiar dignity in their delusion. Pride keeps the cracks sealed, even when the foundation's gone. One evening, as you pass Mr. Dalton's door, you see the familiar glint of his nightly ritual, shoes gleaming under the candlelight. He hums softly while polishing, head bowed, back straight. Outside, London rattles on. Hansom cabs, fog, a city indifferent to its dreamers. Inside, he fights his small, losing battle against decay, armed with nothing but cloth and conviction. He catches your reflection in the doorway and smiles faintly. "A man should look like he's winning," he says, even when he isn't. You nod, because there's nothing else to say. Later, lying in your own bed, you think about the strange arithmetic of Victorian manhood. A man's worth measured in creases ironed, debts concealed, manners maintained. For every soldier, clerk, or tutor here, the greatest burden isn't hunger, it's memory. The memory of being respectable, and the terror of never reclaiming it. Outside, rain begins to fall. You imagine it washing through the city, rinsing away names, ranks, and reputations, leaving only the stubborn shine of a well-polished shoe. Because in the end, that's what these men cling to, the appearance of order in a world built on collapse. Respectability isn't worn, it's laundered nightly, in fear. The first rule of the communal kitchen is this: trust no one with a spoon. Down the narrow corridor, behind a door forever damp with steam and regret, lies the empire's least sanitary battlefield, the boarding house kitchen. It's a place where tea boils, tempers simmer, and morality quietly evaporates. Here, civilization collapses every morning at breakfast and somehow rebuilds itself by supper. You open the door and are hit by the unmistakable scent of compromise, a blend of overboiled cabbage, scorched toast, and the faint ghost of something once edible. Pots hang from hooks like war trophies, each blackened by generations of neglect. The stove wheezes with the exhaustion of a dying monarch, and the sink is perpetually occupied by someone pretending to rinse things that will never be clean. This is where all illusions of gentility come to die. The parlor upstairs may speak of refinement, but the kitchen knows the truth. You can fake a smile, but you can't fake gravy. The house is divided by its condiments. There's the communal salt, kept in a chipped blue pot. And then there's everything else. Private treasures jealously guarded and labeled with initials. Mrs. Featherby keeps her butter wrapped in muslin, buried behind the sweet like a family secret. Miss Vale, the typist, marks her jar of jam with a skull and crossbones drawn in pencil. The poet, of course, has no food of his own, only an air of romantic hunger. You're introduced to the etiquette of rations, an unspoken code older than the house itself. Rule 1, never leave your tea unattended. Rule 2, whoever stirs first owns the kettle. Rule 3, if you borrow someone's sugar, you must confess before your deathbed. The kettle is the true monarch here, shared by all, loved by none. It hisses in judgment of every soul who approaches. Boiling water is a communal miracle, and yet it inspires feuds worthy of Greek tragedy. One morning you arrive to find two tenants locked in silent combat, both waiting for the same kettle to boil. Neither will blink. When the water finally bubbles, they pour simultaneously, spilling half between their cups. Compromise, mutters one, though his tea tastes of defeat. Breakfast is the most dangerous meal. At precisely 8, the kitchen fills with bodies and boiling tempers. The clatter of spoons becomes a kind of Morse code for irritation. Someone burns porridge again. Someone else hides the toasting fork. The smell of scorched oats lingers like guilt. It's easy to mock, but there's something tragic about it too. The Victorian poor spent half their income on food, and the other half pretending not to notice. Bread was stretched with alum, milk watered down, butter mixed with tallow. Everything was a replica of nourishment. Even tea, that sacred British ritual, was often reused, leaves dried on the sill and brewed again in an act of quiet defiance. In the corner sits Mrs. Tim, the landlady, stirring a pot of something that smells aggressively moral. She watches over the chaos with a calm that borders on divine indifference. Cleanliness, she says to no one in particular, is next to godliness. You look around at the greasy plates and wonder which god she has in mind. Across the table, Mr. Dalton, he of the polished shoes, is slicing bread so thin you can almost see through it. Economy, he remarks, is the poetry of survival. His knife slips. The poet watching murmurs, and hunger its rhyme. No one laughs. The conversation turns, as it always does, to food prices. Butter has gone up again. Potatoes are scarce. Someone claims the grocer's flour smells faintly of sawdust, but no one stops buying it. In this house, moral outrage costs less than hunger. Then there's the matter of the jam incident. It begins innocently enough, a missing spoonful from Mrs. Featherby's jar. She notices immediately. She always does. By noon, the house is in uproar. The guilty party is never identified, but suspicion becomes a kind of seasoning sprinkled on every conversation. Weeks later, when Miss Vale moves out, she finds a dried red stain beneath her bed frame and decides not to mention it. Some mysteries are too sticky to solve. Despite the squabbles, the kitchen is also where unlikely alliances form. The typist teaches the soldier how to brew proper tea. Don't stir, swirl. The poet peels potatoes in exchange for rent gossip. Even Mrs. Tim, who claims detachment, occasionally slips a heel of bread to the lodger, too proud to ask. The hierarchy of the house dissolves here. Hunger is the great equalizer. Food reveals everything about class. The clerk cuts his meat with military precision, even when it's only boiled sausage. The seamstress eats quickly, as if time were a debt. The widow insists on serving herself last, because it looks virtuous and costs nothing. In the absence of money, manners become a substitute for appetite. Yet beneath the absurdity, there's tenderness. You watch as Miss Lorimer, the genteel governess, quietly replaces a missing potato on another's plate when she thinks no one's looking. She does it again the next night and the next. Her charity is never acknowledged, which is how she prefers it. Politeness here isn't about good breeding. It's camouflage for kindness. By supper, the kitchen grows warm with fatigue. The day's grievances melt into the smell of cheap stew. Someone hums a hymn. The landlady wipes her hands on her apron and declares, "A full belly makes a quiet house." She's wrong, of course. No one here ever feels full. But the illusion helps. You realize as the plates clatter and the day fades that this room holds more honesty than any parlor. Here, people stop performing and start enduring. Pride, class, and propriety boil down to one simple truth. Everyone is just trying to eat without shame. As you scrape the last bit of porridge from your bowl, you think of how the Victorians judged morality by manners, not hunger. They built empires and etiquette manuals, but never learned to share butter without suspicion. Still, there's a grim humor in it all. You look around at the peeling walls, the squabbling tenants, the indignant kettle, and you can't help smiling. For all its chaos, the kitchen feels alive, loud, flawed, human. The rest of the house pretends to civility. This room tells the truth. You push your chair back, avoiding a puddle that may once have been soup, and glance at the others. They're tired but upright, each protecting their tiny portion of dignity the way they protect their jam. You realize there's an art to this, surviving scarcity without surrendering grace. You stand, cup in hand, and the poet raises his spoon in a mock toast. "To dinner," he says. "May it never arrive too soon." Everyone chuckles, even Mrs. Featherby, though she's still watching her butter. The kettle wheezes one last sigh, the plates clink, and the kitchen exhales. Everything tastes like boiled apology. But somehow that's enough, because in a house where nothing belongs to you, the way you eat becomes who you are, and you can always tell who's broke by how loudly they stir. If the boarding house has a queen, she rules not with a crown, but with a ledger. Mrs. Tim keeps it on her lap like a holy relic, a thick, leather-bound book, its spine worn smooth by years of judgment. Inside are the names of every soul who's ever passed through her doors, each one neatly inked in her looping script. Columns for rent, remarks for conduct, and occasional notes in the margins that read like commandments. Prompt, untidy, morally uncertain. You see her most evenings at her desk in the hallway, the ledger open beneath the yellow light of a gas lamp. Her spectacles glint like two coins of authority. She is an accountant, a confessor, and a quiet tyrant. The house hums around her, doors closing softly, footsteps retreating up the stairs, yet nothing escapes her notice. She doesn't need to move to see. The walls report back to her. There are three kinds of tenants, she often says: the regulars, the hopefuls, and the gone. The first pay on time, the second promise they will, and the third vanish between dawn and inspection. All are accounted for in her book, because the ledger, like God, forgets no one. Once a week, she performs the sacred ritual of rent collection. It begins with a knock, not loud, but deliberate, like the tolling of a conscience. You open your door, and there she stands, wrapped in a shawl of moral authority, ledger in hand. Her expression never wavers. She smiles only at arithmetic that balances. You hand her the coins, 7 shillings stacked with trembling precision. She counts them twice, the rhythm steady, her lips moving as if reciting a psalm. "On time, good," she murmurs, making a note in the book. Then comes the pause, the moment she weighs not your money, but your soul. "You've been quiet this week," she observes, "a sign of good breeding." It sounds like a compliment, but you know better. Quiet tenants are trustworthy, loud ones cause paperwork. If you're short on rent, she doesn't shout, she doesn't need to. Her silence is punishment enough. She'll simply close the ledger and say, "We'll speak tomorrow." That's Victorian for repent. She represents a peculiar class of Victorian power, the domestic matriarch who governs through moral management. Reformers of the time praised such women as the backbone of model lodgings, those semi-charitable houses meant to elevate the working poor through discipline. They believed cleanliness, punctuality, and fear of disappointment could civilize anyone. In practice, it meant people learned to scrub guilt into every corner. You've read pamphlets about such schemes. The Guardian of the Poor, 1872, praised landladies of moral character, whose watchfulness ensures sobriety and good order. They were part landlord, part social experiment, missionaries in bombazine, enforcing virtue through rent. In their ledgers, late payments shared the same ink as late nights. Mrs. Tim would fit right in. Her authority is absolute, yet strangely invisible. No one challenges her because she never raises her voice. She rules by ledger, that perfect fusion of economy and conscience. Numbers don't argue. You see how her presence bends the house around her. Tenants tidy their rooms before inspection, speak softly in the halls, even bless themselves before addressing her. The poet, usually defiant, stands when she enters. The soldier salutes. Mrs. Featherby simpers like a loyal subject. Once you catch her during her rounds, ledger tucked under her arm, candle in hand, eyes sharp as bayonets. She pauses outside each door, listening. A cough earns a frown. Laughter, a pursed lip. She marks something in her book before moving on. You wonder what she writes. Frivolous, optimistic, dangerous. In truth, she's less a villain than a product of her time. Victorian boarding houses were built on moral surveillance. Reformers believed poverty was a failure of discipline, not circumstance. So they designed their lodgings to correct behavior as much as to shelter bodies. Rooms were inspected for cleanliness. Tenants were scolded for untidiness, gossip, even melancholy. A spotless hearth was proof of a spotless soul. Mrs. Tim has absorbed this creed entirely. A clean tenant is a moral tenant, she declares, running a finger along the mantel for dust. Dirt breeds despair. You nod, though you know despair doesn't need help breeding. Every house has its mythology, and hers begins with the ledger. Some say she's kept it since before the war, carrying it from one address to another like a portable conscience. Others claim the ink never fades, that the names of dead tenants still glimmer faintly under the lamp. You glance at it once, open on her desk and swear you see your own name at the bottom of a page, written in pencil, waiting to be inked. You watch how she uses it to mediate disputes. Two tenants quarrel over laundry. The typist accuses the seamstress of stealing her drying line. Mrs. Tim listens, expression neutral, then opens her book. "Miss Vale, you were late with rent last month," she says without looking up. It does not suit one in arrears to quarrel. Silence. The case is closed. The ledger is both gavel and judge. Still, there's a kind of mercy in her precision. She forgives in installments. When the ex-soldier falls ill and misses a week's payment, she leaves a bowl of broth at his door. No note, no comment. And later, records the debt under deferred with caution. For her, compassion is just another line item, carefully balanced. You begin to suspect the ledger isn't just for tenants. It's for her too. Each entry, each checkmark, is a talisman against chaos. In a world where fortunes collapse overnight, a woman alone must find structure somewhere. Numbers never betray you. People always do. One night, you linger by the stairs and overhear her talking softly to herself as she tallies accounts. 7 lodgers, 6 steady, 1 uncertain. She hesitates. God grant it stays that way. Her voice isn't cold, it's tired. The ledger closes with a sigh, the clasp snapping shut like a prayer. It's easy to laugh at her obsession, but it's also easy to envy it. Order, after all, is a luxury. For those trapped in London's chaos, clerks, widows, dreamers. The ledger offers the illusion that life can still be accounted for, that morality can be balanced like books. The next morning, as you pass her desk, she looks up. "Your rent's due tomorrow," she says mildly, as though you'd forgotten. You hadn't. "Of course," you reply. "I've set it aside." She smiles, faint but knowing. "I'm sure you have." When she leaves, you glance at the ledger again. Its pages rustle faintly, like leaves caught in a draft. You imagine all the lives recorded there. Neat lines of obedience, little notes of transgression, the quiet bureaucracy of being judged. And for a moment, you understand the strange, terrible comfort of it. You don't rent a room from her. You rent forgiveness. At night, the house breathes. Not peacefully, never that, but in a kind of restless rhythm, a long collective sigh stretched thin across the floors. The walls here are too thin to keep secrets and too thick to let you forget you're surrounded. Somewhere, someone is coughing, a slow, steady reminder that lungs are communal property in this place. Someone else is arguing with the wallpaper. The pipes groan, the stairs creak, the ceiling drips in a tempo you could almost hum to. You try to sleep, but sleep is a rare commodity in a house that never truly stops moving. Each sound has a personality, a reputation. The window latch that rattles in the wind is called the tooth. The floorboard by the kitchen door, the one that squeals like a gossip caught mid-lie, is Mrs. Featherby. Every noise tells a story, and every tenant becomes fluent in the dialect of complaint. During the day, London outside is the loudest city on earth. Horses, vendors, bells, and steam. But at night, it's the house itself that speaks. And oh, it talks. There's the couple in room 3 who quarrel daily in whispers. You can't make out the words, only the rhythms, a murmur, a pause, a sudden hush, and then that same shuffling reconciliation. A few rooms away, the poet snores with heroic defiance, as if auditioning for immortality. Upstairs, the typist coughs twice, always twice, like punctuation. Even the mice have their own routes and schedules, squeaking through the skirting boards with military efficiency. Privacy here isn't a right, It's an illusion. Your life is overheard, analyzed, and revised before breakfast. The walls are thin enough that your thoughts develop an accent. Gossip in a boarding house is both currency and communion. It's how tenants pay for company, how loneliness is laundered into conversation. By day, the corridors hum with it, small talk that starts as kindness and ends as inquiry. Did you hear about Miss Vale's visitor? They say Mr. Dalton's letters come from no real employer. Mrs. Penny keeps a bottle under the sink. Nonsense, and she's teetotal. All the worse, what's she hiding it for? The beauty of gossip is that it thrives on scarcity. There's so little space for truth that rumor steps in to decorate the void. Every cough becomes a confession. Every silence, a scandal. You learn this the hard way. One afternoon, you pause too long outside the kitchen door. The next day, 3 people thank you for checking in on their welfare. You hadn't said a word. You had simply existed audibly. Even the landlady isn't immune. Her ledger may track sins by ink, but the tenants rewrite them by whisper. When Mrs. Tim spends an extra minute speaking to the postman, the house hums with speculation. By supper, she's secretly engaged. By bedtime, she's widowed again. In a building this small, reputations rise and fall faster than the price of butter. There's a strange comfort in it, though. The noise means you're never entirely alone. The clatter of footsteps on the stair tells you life is still happening. Badly, loudly, relentlessly. It's intrusive, but it's human. You find yourself listening more than you mean to. Late one night, through the thin wall, you hear Miss Lorimer crying softly, the kind of quiet weeping that hopes not to be caught. You lie there, torn between compassion and self-preservation. To knock would embarrass her. To stay silent feels cruel. In the end, you whisper something vague into the dark, as if the wall itself could translate comfort. Another night, you wake to the sound of someone laughing in the kitchen. Not a polite laugh, a real one, sharp and reckless. You creep to the landing and peek down the stairs. There, by the stove, 3 tenants are sharing a pot of tea gone cold, telling stories about their worst landlords. You catch the end of one, and the woman charged rent by the hour. The room erupts in laughter. For once it sounds like joy rather than madness. You smile and slip back upstairs. The laughter fades, replaced by the steady hum of sleeping bodies. The house seems to sigh, grateful for the brief distraction. Of course, gossip isn't always harmless. It can bruise as easily as it binds. When a letter arrives addressed to Miss Vale, care of Mrs. Tim's establishment, in handwriting that looks distinctly masculine, the house holds its breath. No one asks about it outright. That would be indecent, but the air fills with implications. She becomes the typist with a secret. Even her footsteps sound guiltier after that. By week's end, she's moved her candle closer to the wall, as though the flicker might defend her reputation. It doesn't. The rumor, like smoke, seeps through the cracks anyway. In a city this crowded, silence is never trusted. If you aren't part of the conversation, you are the conversation. So everyone contributes, little morsels of observation disguised as empathy. The poet notes that Mrs. Featherby hasn't been seen at breakfast, perhaps mourning a jam jar. The clerk remarks that Mr. Haycroft's collar is fraying. Hard times, one imagines. Each comment is wrapped in civility, but the blade still glints beneath. The Victorians loved their hierarchies, and gossip was just another ladder, a way to climb over others without leaving the room. For women, it offered soft power. For men, a sense of superiority disguised as concern. But beneath it all, gossip was survival. To know was to belong. To be ignored was social extinction. You start noticing how people use noise strategically. A cough to announce presence, a scrape of chair to interrupt tension, a polite throat clearing to signal, "I'm listening." Every sound becomes a kind of currency, traded and taxed. Even the landlady's footsteps upstairs mean something. Reassurance to some, judgment to others. At dawn, when the city is still gray and the fog creeps through the cracks, the house quiets, but never completely. There's always one restless sleeper turning over, one hinge sighing, one clock ticking too loud. The silence is never pure. It's just a pause between sentences. One morning, as you sit by your window with weak tea, you realize something strange. You can predict the day by sound alone. The slam of the front door means the soldier's late. The rhythmic creak above means Miss Lorimer is ironing again. The soft scrape outside your own door, that's the landlady collecting gossip disguised as housekeeping. The house itself has become an instrument, and you, unwillingly, have learned to play it. You think of London, millions of people stacked like this, separated by brick and etiquette, all listening to one another breathe. Privacy is a myth, but connection, however accidental, is real. Maybe that's the trade-off. As the day unfolds, you hear the usual chorus, the kettle's shriek, the chair's complaint, the collective murmur of human endurance. Somewhere, someone tells a joke. Someone else coughs approval. And through it all, the house keeps talking, telling stories even when no one's awake to hear them. You smile, half asleep, as the noise settles into something almost soothing. Every secret here pays rent in rumors. And in a city this crowded, silence is the only scandal. So before you slip back into the noise of the world, do the decent thing. Subscribe. It's the polite way to prove you're listening. After all, in this house, silence is the only scandal. You don't choose your neighbors in a boarding house. They arrive like weather, unpredictable, unstoppable, and impossible to ignore. You inherit them, the way you inherit squeaky pipes and wallpaper patterns. And somehow, in this tangle of strangers stacked one atop another, life happens anyway. Take the second-floor landing, for instance. That's where you'll find the button collector, Mr. Pilch. Nobody knows his first name and nobody's asked. He's small, neat, and perpetually dusted with lint. By day, he works at a tailor's shop pressing trousers for people who don't remember his face. By night, he sits at his little desk, sorting buttons with religious devotion. Metal, bone, mother of pearl, each one catalogued in tiny boxes marked, purpose unknown. He never speaks during daylight hours, but at precisely 10 each evening he mutters to himself, all accounted for. Some say he's keeping track of his sanity. Others think the buttons are his sanity. Above him lives the violinist, though calling him that might be generous. His name, allegedly, is Mr. Hargreaves, and his bowing could make angels file noise complaints. He never performs for an audience, only for the wallpaper, which seems to tolerate him better than most. His music seeps through the floorboards, thin as milk, and twice as likely to curdle. Yet when he pauses, the silence feels wrong, like the house has forgotten its own tune. And then there's the philosopher, Mr. Peck. He occupies the smallest attic room and sells shoe polish down on Holborn, a job he claims is metaphysically rich. Between customers, he writes in a battered notebook titled Treatise on the Suffering of Souls. When someone finally points out the pun, he beams, delighted. "Ah," he says, "then you understand my life's work." The residents of the boarding house are not friends. Friendship would require energy, and everyone's too tired for that. What they share instead is proximity, the quiet, grudging intimacy of people who know too much about each other to pretend otherwise. You learn their habits before you learn their names. You know who gets up first, who snores, who sings. You know Mrs. Featherby's cough means she's found a new gossip topic. You know when the typist drops her pen in frustration, or when the poet's quill goes silent for hours, a bad day. You can tell who's arguing by the pattern of footsteps, who's ill by the absence of them. It's a strange form of companionship, one made of overheard sighs, second-hand laughter, and the faint creak of shared fatigue. The kitchen, of course, is their parliament. They meet there every morning, not to bond, but to tolerate one another. The conversations are always practical. Who's seen the kettle? Who moved the sugar? Was that thunder or the pipes again? Every now and then, someone cracks a joke, not a good one, but a necessary one. And everyone laughs, because laughter is cheaper than warmth. Occasionally, a new tenant arrives, bright-eyed, carrying the illusion of choice. They smile too much, introduce themselves too soon, and speak of temporary arrangements. The veterans exchange glances and wait. Within a month, the newcomer learns the rhythm. Smile less, talk little, pay rent on time, and avoid emotional exposure. The house has a way of training hope out of people without cruelty, just consistency. You catch glimpses of private lives through open doors. A young man polishing his boots while reading the same newspaper for the 5th time. A widow folding her late husband's handkerchiefs like they're still in use. A girl writing a letter, pausing every few lines to stare at nothing. The human heart adapts, even in a hallway that smells of cabbage and disapproval. Sometimes the house surprises you. One night, the violinist falls silent halfway through a sonata. You hear a thump, a chair overturned. Before you can think, the philosopher is already at his door, followed by Mrs. Featherby, the poet, and, eventually, you. Mr. Hargreaves has fainted, candles still burning beside him. No one knows what to do. The philosopher suggests prayer, the poet suggests gin, and Mrs. Featherby insists on both. You carry him downstairs together, awkwardly, clumsily, a small army of mismatched souls united by panic. When he wakes, disoriented but alive, everyone laughs with the strange giddy relief of people who've narrowly avoided tragedy. For one night, the walls seem to relax. Someone brings tea. Someone else hums. For a brief, impossible moment, the house feels like family. The next morning, no one mentions it again. That's the rule. Compassion here is like jam, best kept sealed to prevent spoilage. Still, the memory lingers. You start to notice small kindnesses everywhere. The soldier who quietly patches the philosopher's boot without asking. The typist who leaves a candle stub on the poet's desk when his runs out. Mrs. Tim herself, the stern landlady, who knocks twice before entering rooms now instead of once. No one admits to caring. They simply do. You begin to understand that loneliness here isn't absence. It's presence stretched too thin. Everyone's existence overlaps like echoes. You live inside one another's noise, and that noise becomes strangely comforting. Of course, it's not all tenderness. There are days when tempers fray. When the poet, drunk on half a pint, recites Tennyson until someone throws a crust of bread at him. When the philosopher declares rent an immoral concept and pays in metaphors. When Mrs. Featherby accuses the typist of stealing her candlelight by leaving her door open too long. Chaos, yes, but familiar chaos. If you were to step outside the house, into London's indifferent sprawl, you'd miss it. The arguments, the coughing, the faint tap of the violin above. The city beyond might be grander, but it wouldn't know you like this place does. In here, everyone's flaws are furniture, everyone's oddities, shared wallpaper. You start to think that maybe this is how survival works, not through friendship or love, but through mutual endurance. The philosopher once calls it a society of overlapping inconveniences. You call it comfort. And yet, even comfort wears thin. Some nights, when the house seems too loud, you long for silence. Real silence, not the kind filled with breathing and dreams. But when you imagine it, it feels wrong, like the world has stopped spinning. You realize you've grown used to the orchestra of imperfection. It's there when you wake, when you eat, when you lie down. The violinist's crooked tune, the button collector's nightly counting, the sigh of pipes struggling like lungs. The sounds are maddening and familiar, a lullaby of endurance. One evening, you pass by Mr. Pilch's room and find his door slightly ajar. He's asleep at his desk, head resting on a pile of buttons that glitter faintly in the candlelight. You watch him for a moment, then gently close the door. Down the hall, the violin starts again, still out of tune, still stubbornly beautiful. In the boarding house, love is a luxury, friendship a rumor. But connection, however strange, however awkward, is inevitable. Because when 100 lives rub elbows in narrow corridors, something softer begins to grow between the bruises. You don't love them, not exactly, but their noises become your lullaby. Rent day arrives like weather, inevitable, oppressive, and vaguely personal. It always begins the same way. The air thickens, the house grows quieter. Even the kettle whistles more nervously. Conversations that might have carried down the hall yesterday die out at the sight of the landlady's shadow. The very wallpaper seems to tighten in anticipation. Rent day is not an event here. It's a ritual, sacred and slightly terrifying, observed by all with the reverence usually reserved for funerals and royal weddings. You wake early, though you haven't slept properly. Everyone does. It's not the knock you fear, it's the waiting for it. You count your coins twice, then again, as if arithmetic might take pity and change its mind. 7 shillings this week, due precisely by noon. You've wrapped them in a handkerchief so thin the silver shows through. A small display of transparency, a gesture that says, "See, I am honest. I am trying." Downstairs, you hear the first knock. It travels through the floorboards like a sermon. Mrs. Tim, ledger in hand, makes her rounds with divine patience. The sequence never changes. The punctual tenants first, the hopeful second, the doomed last. You can tell which is which by the rhythm of the house. Mrs. Featherby pays early, of course. She always does. She likes to be seen doing it, door wide open, coins counted aloud, moral superiority wafting down the corridor like cheap perfume. Promptness, she announces, is the backbone of civilization. Everyone agrees loudly enough for her to hear. Next comes Mr. Dalton. Polished shoes, polite smile, the faint smell of nervous sweat. He pays an exact change, his fingers trembling as he hands it over. "On time as always," he murmurs. Mrs. Tim nods approvingly and makes her note in the ledger. You can almost hear the ink drying into permanence. Then comes the middle crowd. Those who hesitate at the door, coins clinking like guilty confessions. The typist, the philosopher, the tailor. Some pay in halves. "More to come on Tuesday, ma'am." Others in promises. Mrs. Tim accepts both, but her pen moves slower, her lips tighter. Deferred, uncertain, watch closely. You, meanwhile, are waiting. Every creak on the stairs, every footstep in the hall sounds like a summons. You rehearse your lines. Good afternoon, Mrs. Tim. Yes, of course, the full amount. Even if it isn't. Especially if it isn't. Because in a boarding house, money isn't just payment. It's confession. It's proof you belong. The door knocks. Not loudly, just firmly enough to stop your heart for a second. You open it, trying to look both surprised and unbothered. Mrs. Tim stands there, shawl wrapped tight, ledger balanced on her arm like a sleeping cat. Her expression is neutral. Too neutral. It's the face of someone who has already heard every excuse known to humankind and plans to enjoy a new one. Good morning, she says. Afternoon, actually, you correct before you can stop yourself. Her eyebrows rise 1 millimeter, the smallest possible punishment. You hand her the coins, warm from your palm. She counts them slowly, lips moving as though translating the sum into moral worth. On time, she says at last. Good. Relief floods your chest, followed by shame for feeling relief at something so ordinary. You thank her, too enthusiastically. She nods, already halfway down the hall, the soft rustle of the ledger marking the next judgment. Through your door you hear the others, the typist's quiet apology, the philosopher's long explanation about the fluctuating nature of currency, the soldier's bluff charm. You'll have it by Monday, Mrs. Tim. The Empire owes me. Mrs. Tim, unamused, writes something in her book that sounds like a warning disguised as punctuation. Then there's the sound everyone dreads. The pause. A door opens. Silence stretches, and you know someone's fallen short. The landlady doesn't scold. She simply stands there, letting the weight of expectation fill the space. Finally, a muttered, "Tomorrow, perhaps." The ledger closes with a sigh that could curdle blood. For the rest of the day, the house moves differently. Those who've paid walk taller, chattier. Those who haven't become quieter, smaller. Ghosts haunting their own rooms. Even laughter feels rationed. No one wants to sound too cheerful in case fortune mistakes it for arrogance. Rent day exposes the hierarchy better than any census ever could. Not by wealth, but by confidence. The ones who pay early think they own the air. The ones who pay late try not to breathe it. You see it most clearly at supper. The dining table stretches like a map of class anxiety. Punctual payers at the top. Plates full, voices bright. The rest trickle downward, conversation thinning with the gravy. The typist eats quickly, eyes down. The poet jokes too much, covering discomfort with noise. Mrs. Tim sits at the head, presiding like a modest deity, her ledger safely tucked away, but omnipresent. Everyone pretends not to glance at it. And yet, beneath the tension, there's solidarity. You catch the philosopher quietly sliding half a roll toward the soldier. The typist pours extra tea for the poet. Even Mrs. Featherby, who normally hoards her butter like inheritance, offers a dab to the newcomer who's been avoiding eye contact all evening. Rent divides, but hunger unites. When supper ends, the landlady closes the evening as she does the accounts. "Thank you all," she says, as though addressing a congregation. "A good week. Let us keep it so." The tenants murmur their good nights, retreating to their rooms like penitents after confession. The house exhales. Not relief exactly, but exhaustion. Rent day takes something out of everyone, even those who can afford it. Later, you pass by Mrs. Tim's desk and glimpse the ledger open. Her handwriting is impeccable, lines of ink so precise they almost look printed. You spot familiar names, the faint check marks beside them, and one or two empty spaces waiting for redemption. In the corner, she's written a note to herself. Pray for Mr. Haycroft. You wonder whether it's piety or bookkeeping. Back in your room, you count your coins again out of habit. They're gone, of course, but the weight of them lingers in your hand, the faint indentation of survival. Rent day is both humiliation and absolution. You pay not just for space, but for permission to exist inside it another week. You lie back on the narrow bed and listen to the house settling into its usual rhythm. Creaks, whispers, the faint sigh of pipework rediscovering calm. Somewhere downstairs, the ledger snaps shut. The sound travels up the walls like a final commandment. For now, everything is forgiven. The debts, the noise, the minor rebellions. The house can sleep again, and so can you, at least until next Friday. Because here, in this crooked little corner of Victorian London, money doesn't buy comfort. It buys invisibility. And that's worth every trembling coin. When the ledger closes, so do your lungs. Until next Friday. If you slip out the back door of the boarding house, past the washing lines, past the drain pipe that leaks with admirable consistency, you'll find it, the alley. It isn't on any map, of course. It doesn't need to be. Every tenant knows it exists the way sailors know the sea, by instinct, by smell, by necessity. A narrow vein of cobblestone squeezed between two sagging rows of brick. It's where the house breathes out what can't be said indoors. The air smells faintly of coal smoke, damp linen, and enterprise. Welcome to the alley market, the quiet economy that keeps the building alive. There are no stalls, no signs, no shouting vendors. Trade here happens in glances, gestures, and unspoken agreements. It's capitalism, but polite. Mrs. Featherby naturally runs the morning shift. She sets up by the drain where the rainwater pools, her kingdom of soggy decency. In her basket, scraps of lace, leftover pudding, and moral superiority, all priced according to gossip value. She'll trade a spoonful of treacle for 2 candles, or half a loaf, for information of reputable origin. No cash ever changes hands. Currency here is usefulness. The typist, Miss Vale, offers services, mending, copying, discreet letter writing for tenants who can't afford paper or pride. In exchange, she collects buttons, ribbons, and the occasional piece of good soap. She never barters for food. It goes bad, she says, and so do people who trade for it. Further down, by the bins, the soldier sells tobacco by the pinch. Surplus from the regiment, he claims, though everyone knows it's from a shop in Clerkenwell. He'll accept matches, tea, or the promise of a drink. Promises in the alley market are as good as gold, provided you deliver within the week. And then there's the philosopher, sitting cross-legged on an upturned crate, holding court over nothing in particular. He doesn't sell or buy. He equalizes. If 2 parties can't agree on the value of an item, he assigns it. A half-used bar of soap, he declares one afternoon, is equal to 1 uncharitable opinion about Mrs. Tim. No one argues. He's the only one who can make arithmetic sound ethical. You wander through this secret economy like an outsider at first, half in awe, half in disbelief. It's absurd and beautiful, a choreography of need disguised as neighborliness. The Victorians prided themselves on order and propriety, but behind every respectable curtain there was always a black market heart. A woman offers you a length of ribbon, fine silk, slightly frayed. For your curtains, she says, though you don't have curtains. You offer a candle stub in return. She accepts without question. The rules are simple. never ask where something came from, and never act surprised that it exists at all. That's the first principle of the alley market. Anonymity equals dignity. You can trade a pair of gloves today and a loaf of bread tomorrow, and no one will ever mention it later. Pity doesn't circulate here, only quiet debt and the soft gratitude of being understood without words. At dusk, when the shadows lengthen and the gaslight from the street flickers uncertainly, the evening traders arrive. The poet slips in, selling words. Not on paper, he's too proud for that, but spoken lines, custom made to suit your purpose. For 3 buttons, he'll compose a compliment. For a candle, a threat phrased so politely it could pass for verse. Once, for a single spoon of sugar, he whispers something that makes the typist blush so violently she drops her pen for an entire week. Behind him, the widow Mrs. Penny appears with her basket of borrowables, hairpins, thread, teaspoons. Temporary lending, she insists, though no one ever returns anything. She keeps meticulous track anyway, as if bookkeeping could hold chaos at bay. And then there's the child, no one knows whose, who appears some evenings to sell flowers plucked from the cemetery 2 streets over. He doesn't speak, only holds out the wilted stems. You buy one for half a biscuit and find it oddly comforting, though you're not sure why. The trades grow stranger as the night deepens. A soldier swaps his brass button for a line of poetry. A landlady from 2 houses down exchanges a piece of smoked fish for a promise that no one saw her there. Even Mrs. Tim herself, yes, her, has been spotted once, cloaked in shadows, trading a broken teacup handle for a packet of lavender. She'll deny it, of course, but the alley remembers. In a way, this market is her mirror, her ledger's opposite. The ledger tracks what people owe. The alley tracks what they give when no one's looking. The 2 systems coexist perfectly, one built on guilt, the other on grace. Sometimes the trades border on the miraculous. When the violinist's string snaps, no one says a word. But the next morning, a spool of catgut appears by his door, neatly coiled. When the button collector falls ill, a loaf of bread is left outside his room, wrapped in brown paper. The bread's too fresh to have come from any tenant. You suspect it came from the baker's wife who lodges 3 streets over. She trades day-old rolls for news of her cousin, who once lived here. You begin to see how this economy extends beyond objects. Favors are currency too. A letter delivered. A lie told kindly. A silence kept. Each gesture adds to the invisible balance sheet that keeps the house from collapsing under the weight of its own poverty. Once, the philosopher explains it to you, his tone half mocking, half reverent. Society, he says, is just barter with paperwork. But this, he gestures at the alley, at the quiet exchanges happening all around. This is civilization, stripped of vanity. Here, people trade not to profit, but to stay alive. You laugh softly. And soap? You ask. He grins. Soap, he says, is the closest thing we have to morality. The humor hides a truth. Cleanliness and decency were twin obsessions in Victorian London, proof that even the poor could be respectable if they scrubbed hard enough. But soap, like decency, was expensive, so people borrowed both where they could. You notice after a while that the alley market has its own sounds, not the chaos of an open bazaar, but a low hum, the murmur of bargains, the occasional clink of metal, the soft laughter of conspirators. It's oddly soothing, this commerce of survival. By night's end, the alley empties. The soldiers retreat. The typist gathers her ribbons. the philosopher vanishes into the fog. The ground is littered with crumbs, buttons, and traces of candle wax. It looks like nothing, but it's everything. Proof that humanity has its own economy, one unrecorded and untaxed. You linger a moment longer. The moonlight catches the puddles, turning them silver. Somewhere behind you, the house shifts. A door closes, a cough travels up the stairs. The world resumes its usual form. But you know now that behind every polite facade lies an alley like this one, humming quietly with need and kindness. You turn to leave and hear a voice, Mrs. Timms, faint but unmistakable, calling someone to supper. For a heartbeat, you imagine her ledger meeting the alley's barter system halfway, ink and kindness shaking hands in the dark. Because in this city, morality and hunger are constant neighbors. So before you slip back into the fog, be decent. Subscribe. Think of it as your small trade in this alley of stories. After all, survival isn't theft, it's choreography. You start to notice it around your third week. The feeling that the house is watching you. Not in a sinister way exactly, more like an exhausted aunt keeping an eye on her troublesome nieces and nephews. It groans in the night, sighs at sunrise, and creaks whenever someone lies. The walls don't speak, but they mutter, a low private commentary that seems to come from the plaster itself. You tell yourself it's just the wind in the eaves, but there's no wind tonight, and still the ceiling whispers. Victorian houses always have personalities. They absorb their tenants the way fabric absorbs smoke, quietly, persistently, forever. Every heartbreak, every quarrel, every apology half whispered through tears seeps into the walls like damp. This one, though, feels particularly saturated. It isn't haunted. It's just tired of listening. The house has been subdivided again, and rearranged more times than you can count. Rooms once meant for one family now hold 6 unrelated lives. A drawing room is now a dormitory, the scullery, a makeshift bedroom. The wallpaper in the hallway bears the faint outline of vanished furniture, ghostly rectangles where portraits used to hang. You can almost see the past rooms flicker over the present, like a projector slightly out of sync. At night, when everyone else is asleep, or pretending to be, you sit by your small window and listen. The noises have patterns. A door that clicks twice before closing. Pipes that gurgle like someone clearing their throat before confession. The faint scuttle of unseen feet. Mice, perhaps, or history trying to rearrange itself. Once, as you're drifting between waking and sleep, you hear a whisper that doesn't belong to any living tenant. Not words exactly, more like the sound of a sigh stretched into language. You open your eyes, and the candle trembles, though there's no draft. You tell yourself it's imagination, and perhaps it is. The Victorians were experts at turning guilt into ghosts. You learn later that the house has a reputation. A bit peculiar, the grocer says when you mention your address. Good bones, but it remembers. You laugh it off, though you notice his tone, not fear, but respect. Londoners understand that old buildings are like old people, full of stories, some better left unmentioned. The tenants, too, treat the house as a living presence. Mrs. Featherby always greets it when she enters. Evening, old girl, as though acknowledging an equal. The typist taps the doorframe before going upstairs, a superstition she can't explain. And the soldier, who insists he doesn't believe in nonsense, refuses to whistle after dark. Echo's funny, he says. There's an old superstition about houses like this, that buildings soak up emotion like fabric soaks up rain, If that's true, this one is waterlogged. Think of it. Decades of tenants, each one carrying their small catastrophes, lost love, lost work, lost faith. The house has heard every confession, every sob muffled into a pillow, every whispered prayer for rent money. No wonder it groans. It's heavy with empathy. The philosopher upstairs insists it's not ghosts, but memory. Buildings remember through repetition, he tells you one night in the kitchen, while stirring tea with the solemnity of a priest. Every sound, every movement leaves an imprint. The wood grows accustomed to the rhythm of despair. He says this without irony. You look at the spoon clinking against the cup and realize even that sound will be added to the house's archive of endurance. Sometimes, though, it does feel haunted, not by specters, but by routine. You open a door and find a draft that smells faintly of candle smoke, though no one's lit one in hours. You step on a floorboard and feel it sink slightly, as if something beneath it shifted. You turn corners expecting someone and find only the wallpaper, staring back. One night, you wake to the unmistakable sound of weeping. Soft, rhythmic, heartbreakingly polite. You follow it down the corridor, candle in hand, but it stops whenever you get close. Eventually, you realize it's coming from the wall itself, the plaster expanding, contracting, mimicking breath. You press your ear to it, and the sound vanishes. The next morning, the wall looks damp, as though something inside it has been crying for a long time. It's easy to mock the superstitions until they start to make sense. Poverty itself feels ghostly, an invisible hand rearranging your life, tightening around your throat when you least expect it. The Victorians spoke of hungry ghosts, not supernatural creatures, but the lingering presence of need. You suspect there are plenty of those here. You start to notice the little shrines people build to keep the house on their side. The poet leaves crumbs by the fireplace for luck. Mrs. Penny hangs a horseshoe by her window, though it's upside down and therefore useless. Even Mrs. Tim keeps a sprig of dried lavender above her ledger. For peace, she says. None of them believe in ghosts, but all behave as if the house might. Once, during a storm, the roof leaks badly enough to send the tenants scurrying with buckets. As the water drips in rhythmic beats, Mrs. Featherby mutters, "It's remembering again." The philosopher nods. "It leaks where it weeps," he says, with a poet's sense of timing and a philosopher's lack of helpfulness. The next day, you find the wallpaper in your room has bubbled in one corner. When you press it gently, a puff of cold air escapes, as if the house is exhaling. For a moment, you think you smell ink and old paper, like a ledger left open too long. You laugh it off, but you stop pressing after that. The truth is, buildings like this do hold memories. Victorian brickwork was laid with lime, horsehair, and sweat. The physical residue of hundreds of anonymous laborers. Every beam, every stair, every tile bears the fingerprints of those who built and repaired it. And later, the fingerprints of those who simply tried to survive within it. So perhaps it isn't surprising that the house feels alive. It has heard too much not to be. It has listened through every argument, every rent plea, every birth and quiet death. It has learned when to stay silent and when to creak in sympathy. One night the typist asks softly, "Do you ever think it keeps us here on purpose?" You don't answer, because sometimes, when the city feels too big and the street too cold, the warmth of the house feels almost deliberate, like a hand holding you back from vanishing. But other nights, when the air is heavy and the room's too quiet, you swear the walls are whispering, Names. Not yours, not anyone's, just names that don't exist anymore. A litany of lost renters, perhaps, echoing through the cracks. You fall asleep to the sound of the house settling, the way old bodies settle before sleep, with complaint, with grace. You dream of corridors folding into each other, staircases looping endlessly, rooms that lead back to themselves. When you wake, the candles burn down to its base, and your pillow smells faintly of dust and lavender. It isn't haunted. It's just tired of listening. Because poverty, like grief, has an echo. And here, it echoes beautifully. You sit up, stretch, and listen once more. The faint heartbeat of the floorboards, the whisper of settling air, the quiet hum of a house that has seen too much to stay still. Every floorboard holds a secret that once tried to leave. You wake to screaming, not the dramatic, blood-curdling kind, more the shrill, household variety that suggests something very wet and very inconvenient has just happened. You sit up, groggy, and immediately notice it. A faint, suspicious smell wafting through the floorboards. Damp, sour, and, well, undeniably human. Welcome to the Great Privy Flood. It starts, as most tragedies do, with denial. Someone downstairs insists it's just a minor drainage issue. Someone else swears they heard it bubbling yesterday. But within minutes, the truth rises, quite literally, up from the basement. A murky, brownish tide creeping its way through the cracks like a biblical plague, announcing the complete and utter failure of the house's plumbing. The first casualty is the kitchen mat. It goes under heroically, sacrificed without ceremony. The second is Mrs. Featherby's dignity, as she slips and lets out a shriek that echoes through 3 floors. By the time you reach the landing, chaos has taken human form. Tenants are darting about with buckets, towels, and misplaced optimism. The house, that old patient thing, groans in mortification. "Don't panic," calls Mrs. Tim, the landlady, though she's the only one panicking. Her beloved Ledger sits on a chair far from the flood, covered reverently with her shawl, as though modesty might protect it from contamination. "We mustn't make a fuss," she insists, ankle-deep in the Victorian apocalypse. The soldier takes command naturally. He grabs a broom and starts directing traffic like he's back in the field. Basin brigade to the stairs. Contain the enemy flow. He's remarkably cheerful for a man defending against sewage. The typist, sleeves rolled to the elbow, attacks the situation with bureaucratic efficiency, forming a human chain of buckets from kitchen to yard. Even the poet joins in, composing impromptu verse between groans of disgust. O England, proud land of drains and despair, thy pipes do burst, thy lodgers swear. He's pelted with a damp sponge. Soon the entire household is united in a single grim purpose, survival through sanitation. The philosopher offers commentary throughout, of course. This, he declares while holding a mop like a scepter, is the great equalizer of mankind. Kings and clerks alike must face the flood. Mrs. Featherby tells him to stop philosophizing and start scrubbing. You join the effort reluctantly, armed with a bucket and a handkerchief tied over your nose. The air is thick with effort and odor. Water sloshes, soap slips, curses bloom like wildflowers. Somewhere in the midst of it all, someone starts laughing. That mad, helpless laughter of people who've gone beyond despair into the absurd. Soon everyone's laughing, even Mrs. Tim, though she tries to disguise it as coughing. There's something strangely beautiful about it, the collapse of class, propriety, and ego under the universal weight of muck. The poet hauls buckets beside the clerk. The typist wrings out towels with the soldier. The philosopher, finally useful, calculates how to redirect the flow toward the back drain. Gravity, he says proudly, is the only law that never fails. The landlady mutters a prayer. It's unclear whether she's addressing God, the pipes, or her reputation. Hours pass in this purgatorial ballet of filth. The water, or whatever it technically qualifies as, begins to recede. Floors are scrubbed, windows flung open, and every candle in the house is lit in self-defense. The soldier finds the culprit, a burst pipe behind the old privy, corroded beyond redemption. Could have been worse, he says cheerfully. In the army, this would count as good luck. Mrs. Featherby glares. In the army, she replies, someone else cleans it up. By late afternoon, the crisis has become legend. The tenants sit around the kitchen table, damp, exhausted, and smelling faintly of carbolic soap and trauma. Someone produces tea. Someone else passes a bottle. The poet raises his cup in a solemn toast. To civilization, he says, and its plumbing. The laughter that follows is weary, but genuine. You realize, between the dripping and the drying, that something extraordinary has happened. For once, everyone in the house has forgotten to be separate. The philosopher isn't quoting Kant. The typist isn't guarding her jam. And even Mrs. Tim has accepted a biscuit from the soldier's tin. Disaster, it turns out, is excellent social glue. There's a kind of intimacy in shared indignity. The people who yesterday eyed each other with suspicion now speak freely about work, about dreams, about the impossibility of finding a decent bath in London. For a few hours, the boarding house feels less like a collection of strangers and more like a community forcibly baptized by circumstance. As the evening deepens, the worst of the smell begins to fade. The floors, now scrubbed to within an inch of their lives, shine with manic cleanliness. Mrs. Tim reopens her ledger, visibly relieved. The poet, emboldened, suggests the incident be remembered as the Great Flood of '92. The typist recommends silence instead. Outside, the city continues indifferent. Hansom cabs splashing through puddles, church bells ringing faintly over the rooftops. But inside, the house hums with a rare, human warmth. The soldier hums a tune while mending the broom handle. The philosopher dozes, mop still in hand. Even the pipes, those treacherous villains, seem to gurgle apologetically. You retreat to your room, body aching, spirit oddly light. You can still hear the laughter downstairs, tired, real, necessary. The smell lingers faintly, but so does the camaraderie. In the candlelight, the house looks cleaner, calmer, almost content, as though grateful for the chaos that briefly made it feel alive again. You lie down and think of how quickly propriety dissolves under pressure. Victorian decorum can survive poverty, scandal, even heartbreak, but not plumbing. There's something reassuring about that. For all its rules and hierarchies, society levels itself in the most democratic of disasters. Tomorrow, the landlady will rewrite the story. All swift action and commendable restraint. Mrs. Featherby will return to moralizing. The typist will scrub her hands raw, muttering about hygiene. The philosopher will call it a parable. The poet will try disastrously to rhyme drain with pain. But tonight, the boarding house is united in one glorious truth. They have survived something ridiculous together. And for once, there are no judgments, no debts, no etiquette, only the relief of collective disgust and shared endurance. The house settles, creaking like an old lady sighing after laughter. The candle gutters, The water drips somewhere unseen, and the faint smell of bleach hovers like a saint's halo over the wreckage. It's the cleanest the place has felt in months, inside and out, because nothing, truly nothing, unites people like mutual disgust. The night after the flood is unusually still. No arguing, no footsteps overhead, no kettle hissing its grievances. Even the pipes, those eternal gossipers, seem too tired to murmur. The boarding house has sunk into something rare. Peace. You sit by your window, candle guttering low, and watch the fog drift across the alley like a soft forgetting. The air smells faintly of soap and damp wood. Not pleasant exactly, but cleaner than before. Downstairs, someone's humming. Faint, off-key, but warm. It might be the soldier, or the poet, or the house itself, humming because it survived another indignity. After chaos, there's always a kind of hush. It isn't calm, not really. More like exhaustion that's decided to sound holy. The tenants are too worn out to be proper, too empty to quarrel. The typist has gone to bed without folding her sleeves. Mrs. Featherby skipped her evening prayers. Even Mrs. Tim, protector of ledgers and order, left her shawl draped carelessly across the banister. The world hasn't been restored. It's simply stopped wobbling for a moment. You realize you've grown fond of this fragile equilibrium, the way catastrophe briefly makes people kind. The laughter that followed the flood still hangs in the air, faint as perfume. You can almost hear it echo between the floorboards. For once, the house doesn't feel like a machine for survival. It feels inhabited, alive in the gentlest sense. You pour yourself a cup of tea, lukewarm, tannic, somehow medicinal, and let your thoughts wander. No one here dreams of staying forever. Everyone at some point swears they'll leave. The typist plans to open her own office someday, with clean floors and no gossip. The poet says he'll publish a book and move to the seaside. The soldier talks about going north, where the air's got manners. Even Mrs. Tim once mentioned retiring to a cottage, though it's hard to imagine her ledgerless. They all say it, and maybe they even mean it. But the days blur, the rent resets, and time, that trickster, folds in on itself. People leave, yes, but not forward. They leave sideways, replaced by new faces that learn the same patterns. The house absorbs them all, teaches them its rhythm: work, pay, endure, repeat. It's not a prison, not exactly. More a lullaby with walls. You've started noticing the small ways people cope. The typist buys a sprig of flowers for her desk every Monday, wilted by Wednesday, replaced by Friday. The philosopher carves tiny notches in his windowsill, one for each day survived. The soldier writes letters to people who don't exist, comrades, brothers, a sweetheart long since imaginary, and burns them when they're done. Everyone keeps a little fiction tucked away, something to make endurance feel like purpose. The Victorians had a word for this: respectable perseverance. It sounds noble, but it's really just survival with better manners. You do what you must. You pretend it means something. And yet, under the surface, everyone dreams of escape. You can feel it in the pauses, in the sighs between sentences. It's the same dream whispered across 100 rooms in London, of fresh air, open light, rooms with doors that close properly. But freedom costs more than rent. It demands reinvention, and most people here are too tired to start again. So they adapt instead. They build tiny versions of freedom within the walls. A neat drawer, a polished shoe, a poem no one reads. You realize the genius of human beings isn't courage or ambition. It's adjustment. People will build meaning out of almost anything, even cracked ceilings and secondhand teapots. The poet once said, "London eats its poor and burps respectability." He's not wrong, but he missed something. London also teaches its poor to chew back. You look out the window. The street below glows faintly under a gas lamp. Somewhere in the fog, a horse snorts, a carriage clatters, a woman laughs. Life goes on, indifferent but generous in its own way. You imagine the thousands of other windows like yours, each with someone staring out, someone waiting for a better tomorrow that stubbornly resembles today. It's not hopelessness that binds you to this life. It's familiarity. The strange comfort of knowing exactly where the floor creaks and which pipe groans before dawn. The way Mrs. Featherby's gossip starts every morning at the same pitch. The sound of the typist's typewriter tapping like a heartbeat in the next room. You wonder if, perhaps, escape isn't always about leaving. Maybe it's about finding something beautiful in the staying. The philosopher who has taken to calling you student said once, "The opposite of despair isn't joy, it's attention." He was stirring his tea when he said it, but it stuck with you. Perhaps that's what survival really is, paying attention to the small mercies. The candle that burns evenly, the bread that doesn't mold too soon, the laughter that bubbles up unexpectedly from the cracks. You think of Mrs. Tim counting coins with her precise priestly hands, the poet asleep at his desk, the soldier humming low tunes to keep the ghosts quiet, even Mrs. Featherby muttering complaints into her pillow. Each one clings to a fragment of hope, absurdly and magnificently human. The house, in its weary way, holds them all. It doesn't comfort or condemn. It simply endures. The flood, the gossip, the loneliness. It's seen it all before. Maybe that's what makes it feel alive. It's too stubborn to give up. You finish your tea, set the cup aside, and stretch. The candle burns low, casting gentle shadows that flicker across the cracked plaster. The quiet feels deeper tonight, but not empty. The house seems to breathe with you, a long, tired exhale shared between equals. You realize that somehow you've stopped wishing for silence. You've made peace with the whispers, the creaks, the absurdity of it all. Life here isn't grand, but it's strangely complete, a collage of small humiliations and smaller joys. Tomorrow, there will be noise again. Arguments, laughter, the kettle shriek, the familiar chaos of people trying their best. But for now, the world has softened. You lie back, pull the blanket close, and let the rhythm of the house settle around you. The boards sigh, the pipes hum a faint lullaby. For once, no one is moving. No one is pretending. The city outside can wait. You close your eyes, and for once, the house doesn't creak. It listens. You've made it. Another week survived, rent paid, shoes polished, dignity mostly intact. You've endured the gossip, the groaning pipes, the mysterious leaks, and the faint, persistent sound of someone crying through the wall. You've even learned to tell the difference between the poet's sighs and the plumbing's despair, which in this house is a mark of true expertise. The landlady is asleep now, ledger closed, shawl folded. The kettle's gone quiet. The candle burns low on the sill. Somewhere, the philosopher is dreaming of justice, the typist of sunlight, and the soldier, well, he's snoring, loudly. The house, that weary miracle of survival, exhales with you. You've learned something here, though it's hard to name. Perhaps it's that civilization, for all its grandeur, is mostly made up of small, stubborn acts of decency. The sharing of butter, the lending of soap, the polite lie that keeps hope alive. Or maybe it's that class and chaos live under the same roof more easily than anyone likes to admit. Victorian boarding houses were absurd, yes, but also honest. They taught endurance, the choreography of politeness, and the art of finding comfort in the utterly uncomfortable. They were society in miniature, loud, leaky, and always on the brink of collapse, but somehow still standing, much like the people inside them. So if you're still awake now, listening to the echoes of that narrow, overpopulated world, you've done better than half of Victorian London. You've survived your own week of rent and reason. And if you've drifted somewhere between thought and dream, that's all right too. This story was never meant to keep you up, only to keep you company. Before you go, though, be decent. Subscribe. Not just for me, but for every half-frozen tenant who ever pretended tea counted as dinner. Think of it as paying rent in kindness. One small gesture to keep this little house of history standing. Good night, lodger. May your floor stay level, your gossip stay kind, and your dreams be free of damp ceilings. And remember, every time you listen, you're keeping these stories alive. You're not just here for comfort. You're part of the light that keeps the whole crooked house glowing.